I probably should have blocked his number. That's what a normal person would have done, right? The moment things got weird, the second those messages crossed a line. But I didn't. Instead, I kept reading them, kept responding, kept letting it happen, even when I knew I shouldn't. Mark has been in my life since I was a kid, one of those ever-present family friends who shows up in every holiday photo, who helps your dad fix the leaky sink or grills burgers at the 4th of July barbecue like he owns the place. My dad and Mark go back to high school. Football buddies, beer buddies, the whole thing. So yeah, it felt a little messed up that now, at 22, I was lying in bed rereading his texts, my heart pounding way too fast for someone just talking to Uncle Mark. I still remember the first message that gave me pause. It was almost a year ago, during winter break from college. I was home visiting my parents, bored out of my mind, when I got a text from an unknown number. Still up? Heard you were back in town. It was signed M. I didn't even have his number saved, but I figured it out fast. Mark? Bingo! You remember the old man. That kicked off what I thought would just be casual small talk, but it wasn't. That night he asked me what I was watching on Netflix, what I was drinking. Then he sent a pic of his whiskey glass. Then one of his fireplace. Then, after a longer pause, bet you look good in the firelight. I stared at my phone for a long time after that one. I didn't respond. But I didn't block him either. Things simmered down for a while. I went back to school. Life got busy. Mark faded back into the background. Christmas card came in the mail with his usual, "Tell your dad he's still a lucky bastard" scrawl. The usual. Then summer came. And everything changed. I was back home again, finishing up an internship downtown and crashing at my parents' place until I could afford to move out. Mark lived 3 blocks away. He always had, and he'd swing by a lot. More than usual, honestly. At first I thought I was imagining it. The extra long looks. The way he'd smile when I opened the door instead of my dad. How he'd sit on the edge of the kitchen stool and talk only to me, even if the whole family was around. But then, one night, the text started again. "You looked good tonight." That was all it said. I read it twice, sitting in bed in my boxers, sweating from the July heat and trying not to read too far into it. But I was already in too deep. "Thanks?" His reply came instantly. "That shirt you were wearing. Tight in all the right places." I stared at my phone, trying to ignore the fact that my body was responding to this in a way that definitely didn't align with how I was supposed to feel about my dad's best friend. "You drinking again?" "1 glass. You?" "No, just water." Then, after a pause, "You're cute when you're nervous." I didn't sleep much that night. Now it's been 3 weeks. Every night, same thing. Messages that dance the line between flirty and full-on inappropriate. And every night I reply. Not always with much. Sometimes just an emoji, sometimes a one-word answer. But I reply. And he knows exactly what he's doing. I haven't told anyone. My best friend would lose his mind. My dad, well, I don't even want to think about how that conversation would go. But tonight, something's different. Because tonight, Mark didn't just send a text, he sent a photo. A mirror selfie, no shirt, just a towel. And the caption underneath? "Wish you were here." I must have stared at that picture for a solid 5 minutes. It wasn't just the towel, or the fact that it was slung low enough to make me wonder if it was about to fall off. It was the way he was looking at the camera, like he knew exactly what kind of effect he had. Confident, teasing, not some accidental thirst trap from a middle-aged man. No, this was intentional, and it was meant for me. I sat on the edge of my bed, legs bouncing, unsure if I was sweating from the heat or the panic, or maybe the anticipation. What was I supposed to do with this? Ignore it? Pretend I hadn't seen it? Text back something sarcastic to lighten the mood? I even thought about sending one of those haha reactions just to brush it off. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I just sat there, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, overthinking every possible response. Then my phone vibrated again. Too much? God. I felt my chest tighten. He knew. He knew he was crossing the line. And he was still poking at it, testing how far I'd let him go. I could have shut it down right then. Could have sent a firm, "Yeah, kind of weird," or even just left him on read. But that wasn't what I did. Instead, I typed, "I don't know what you're doing, Mark," and immediately regretted how soft that sounded. He replied almost instantly, "I think you do." My breath caught. "This doesn't feel like something I should be part of," I wrote back. "You're my dad's best friend." Another pause, this time longer. Long enough to make me think maybe I'd finally scared him off. That maybe the reality of the situation had hit him. That this weird little back and forth had run its course, and he'd retreat like it never happened. But no, Mark didn't retreat. He doubled down. "You're not a kid anymore." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It was short. Simple. But it said everything. It wasn't even flirty. It was deliberate. A reminder. A shift in tone. He was trying to tell me this wasn't about nostalgia. This wasn't about him seeing me as some extension of his friendship with my dad. It wasn't fatherly or protective or misguided affection. It was interest as a man, as someone he wanted. And I didn't know what the hell to do with that, so I didn't respond. I turned my phone over on the nightstand, laid back, and stared at the ceiling. I could still see the outline of that towel in my mind, the way it hung just right. His chest, broad and lined with muscle under a dusting of hair. Not bodybuilder perfect, but solid in that way older guys sometimes are when they've worked hard their whole lives. Weathered. Real. I hated how much I liked it. I didn't sleep well. I tossed and turned for hours, replaying every message, every look he'd given me in the past few weeks. I kept thinking back to the way his hand had brushed my shoulder the other night when he was saying goodbye, how he'd let it linger a second too long. I'd felt something then, but I told myself I was imagining it. Now I wasn't so sure. When I woke up the next morning, his message was still there. Unread. Waiting. And for a while I thought maybe that would be the end of it. That he'd realize he crossed a line and back off. That I wouldn't hear from him again. But around 11 a.m., I got another text. "Still thinking about you." And below that, a photo. This time, it wasn't a thirst trap. It was a shot of his breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and what looked like black coffee, in a cracked ceramic mug. The caption underneath said, "Should have made enough for two." Like nothing had changed. Like we hadn't crossed into dangerous territory the night before. It was weirdly intimate. Almost normal. I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I wandered down to the kitchen, where my dad was already halfway through his own coffee, flipping through the news on his tablet like it was any other Saturday morning. He looked up and nodded. "You sleep all right?" "Yeah," I lied, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. "You working today?" "Later." "Just a short shift." Dad nodded again and went back to reading. I sat there across from him, pretending to scroll through my phone, feeling a wave of guilt pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Mark was like his brother. They'd been through everything together. College, job changes, even a messy divorce on Mark's side that my dad helped him through. He was the guy who helped put up the drywall when we remodeled the kitchen, who watched the Seahawks games in our living room, who toasted my dad's birthday every single year with the same dumb joke about how they were both too old to keep getting away with this much beer, and now he was texting me like I was his secret, like I was something he wanted. I checked my phone again under the table. No new message. Just that last one, waiting for a reply. I could have ended it right then. I didn't. Instead, I finished my juice, told my dad I was heading out for a walk, and the second I was outside the house, I texted back. "Why me?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared again. Finally, he sent, "Because you're the one I think about." And then, "You want to come over tonight?" I stood on the sidewalk, the morning sun hitting my face, my stomach tight with something between dread and excitement. And for the first time, I realized I didn't want to say no. I spent the rest of the day trying to pretend I wasn't thinking about it. But the truth is, it sat there in the back of my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. Every few minutes, I'd pull out my phone, stare at the message, and then put it away again. "You want to come over tonight?" It was simple enough, casual, even. But we both knew what it meant. It wasn't about grabbing a beer or catching a game. It wasn't small talk. It was a question loaded with intention, waiting for me to decide what kind of person I was going to be next. By late afternoon, I was restless. I went for a run, showered, tried to distract myself with YouTube, even drove out to a coffee shop just to kill time. None of it worked. Every sound, every vibration from my phone made my heart jump. At around 6, he texted again. "If it makes you feel better, it doesn't have to be weird." Weird. That word almost made me laugh. It was already weird. The kind of weird you don't come back from. The kind that changes how you see people. But even as I sat there on my bed, telling myself I shouldn't go, that I couldn't go, another part of me was already thinking about what I'd say if I did. It wasn't like I didn't know where he lived. Mark's house was practically a second home when I was a kid. I knew the creak in the porch step, the smell of his garage, the sound of his old dog's collar jingling as it used to follow him around. He still lived there, same house, same quiet street 3 blocks away from mine. When the sun started to set, I told my dad I was heading out to meet a friend. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Be back before midnight," he said. "Yeah," I muttered, grabbing my keys. My hands were shaking the whole drive there. It felt like I was walking into something irreversible. I couldn't decide if I wanted it to happen or if I just needed to know what would happen. The air in my car felt heavy, like I could taste the tension sitting in my throat. When I pulled up to his house, all the lights were on inside. I almost turned around right there, but before I could, my phone buzzed again. "You outside?" I looked up at the living room window, and sure enough, there he was. Mark leaning against the frame, one hand holding his phone, the other lifting a beer toward me in a half smile that was way too calm for how chaotic I felt. I got out of the car. Every step toward that front door felt like something out of a dream, or maybe a warning. He opened the door before I could knock. "Hey," he said, casual as ever. "Didn't think you'd actually come." I shrugged. "I almost didn't." Mark chuckled softly and stepped aside, letting me in. "That's fair." The house smelled the same. Wood, aftershave, a hint of beer. There was music playing quietly in the background, something low and smooth. He was wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, barefoot, hair still slightly damp like he'd just showered. "Want a drink?" he asked, heading for the kitchen. "I'm good," I said, even though my throat was dry. He grabbed one for himself anyway and leaned against the counter, studying me over the rim of the bottle. His gaze wasn't the kind you could ignore. It lingered, steady, quiet, the kind of look that didn't need words. "Relax," he said after a beat. "You look like you're about to bolt." "Maybe I should," I admitted. He smiled, not in a teasing way this time, but almost gently. "Then why didn't you?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to say it out loud. He stepped closer, slowly enough that I could have moved away if I wanted to. But I didn't. He stopped a couple feet in front of me, eyes locked on mine. The air between us felt tight, electric. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, voice low. "If you want to leave, you can. No questions, no judgment." I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" "Then we stop pretending." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. He was so calm, so sure, like he'd been waiting for me to catch up. My mind was still racing, flashes of my dad, of the years of cookouts and camping trips and jokes that suddenly didn't feel funny anymore. But underneath all that noise was something quieter, heavier, something that told me I'd been waiting too. Mark reached out and brushed his thumb against my wrist. The touch was light, almost nothing, but it made my whole body tense. I should have pulled back. I didn't. "I don't even know what this is," I said softly. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I know I've wanted it for a while." I looked up at him. "You shouldn't say that. I probably shouldn't do this either." And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or aggressive, just a slow, deliberate press of his lips against mine, like he wanted to give me time to decide whether to kiss him back. I did. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just leaned into it. His hand came up to the back of my neck, his thumb tracing my jaw. The world shrank until it was just that. His breath, his warmth, the taste of beer on his lips. When he finally pulled back, he kept his hand there, fingers resting against my skin. "You still okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what okay even meant anymore. He smiled faintly, eyes flicking toward the couch. "We can just sit, if you want." I followed his gaze and hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I said. "Let's just sit." We did. We didn't talk much after that. The silence was different now. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. Every glance, every brush of his hand against mine said more than either of us could. But I knew this wasn't something that could stay hidden forever. And as I sat there next to him, watching the shadows of the room flicker across his face, one thought kept looping in my mind. If my dad ever found out, I'd lose them both. The next morning, the guilt hit me like a freight train. It was one thing to think about him, to let those late-night texts turn into something unspoken but thrilling. It was another thing entirely to have actually done it. To have crossed that line so completely there was no pretending anymore. I didn't even remember driving home. Just flashes. His voice saying, "Take it easy, kid." His hand on the door as I left. The glow of the streetlights sliding across my windshield while my chest ached in ways I didn't know how to name. I barely slept. When I woke up, my phone was face down on the nightstand. I half expected it to be full of missed calls or texts from him, but when I picked it up, the screen was empty. Just silence. And somehow that made it worse. All through breakfast, I could barely look my dad in the eye. He was talking about work, something about an upcoming project, and I nodded at the right times but couldn't tell you a word of it. My mom had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, so it was just the two of us. The quiet between us felt like a minefield. Halfway through his coffee, my dad looked up and frowned. "You okay, bud? You look pale." "Yeah," I lied. "Just didn't sleep great." He shrugged and went back to scrolling through his phone. "Mark said you two caught up last night," he said after a pause. The words hit me so hard I almost dropped my fork. "What?" He nodded, not noticing the panic on my face. "He texted me this morning, said it was good seeing you." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Oh, yeah, we talked for a bit," Dad smiled. "That guy's been through a lot, but he's solid. You ever need anything? Mark's the kind of person you can count on." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I know." It felt like a cruel joke. He had no idea what had really happened. I excused myself as soon as I could, saying I needed to run errands, and the moment I was out of the house, I checked my messages again. Still nothing. No text, no missed call. The silence stretched all day. By the time the sun started to set, I was a mess of confusion and regret. Part of me was relieved he hadn't reached out. The other part, the bigger, louder part, was terrified he never would. It wasn't until almost midnight that my phone buzzed. Can't stop thinking about last night. I stared at the message, my pulse kicking up. Another came right after it. "You okay?" I typed back before I could stop myself. "I don't know." "Want to talk?" I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. My head was screaming no, but my body, my heartbeat, my stupid curiosity said otherwise. "I shouldn't." "That's not what I asked." He always knew exactly what to say, and before I could change my mind, another message came through. "I'm outside." My stomach dropped. I jumped up and looked out my window, and there it was, his truck, parked across the street, headlights off, engine idling low. The sight of it sent a wave of heat rushing through me, equal parts fear, and something darker I didn't want to name. I threw on a hoodie, slipped out through the side door, and crossed the street as quietly as I could. He rolled down the window before I even reached the truck. "Get in," he said softly. I did. The cab smelled like leather and pine, the air warm and close. He looked the same as always, calm, unreadable, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. Neither of us said anything for a while. Finally, I spoke. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. This is insane. I know that too." So why? Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, he said, cutting me off. His voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. You can hate me for it later. I just needed to see you. I turned toward him, my chest tightening. Mark, you can't do this. My dad. Your dad doesn't know, and he doesn't have to. That's not the point. Then what is? He leaned in closer as he said it, his words low, deliberate. His hand brushed my knee, and it was like every nerve in my body came alive at once. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to stay. I wanted both things at once, and neither felt possible. Last night shouldn't have happened, I said finally, the words barely more than a whisper. He studied me, his eyes moving across my face. You regret it? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't. Not really. I think about it too much, I admitted quietly. That was all it took. He leaned in again, slow, searching my face for permission. And God help me, I didn't stop him. His mouth found mine again, softer this time, less sure. It wasn't like the first kiss. It was slower, heavier, like he was trying to memorize it. I kissed him back before I could think about what it meant. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing hard. Tell me to stop, he whispered. I should have. I almost did. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, drive. He blinked. What? Just drive, anywhere. So he did. We drove in silence, through the quiet streets, past the closed shops and sleeping houses, until the city lights faded and the trees closed in around us. He pulled off near the old lookout point that overlooked the water, a place I hadn't been since I was in high school. He parked, turned off the engine, and for a while neither of us moved. The night air was thick, with summer heat, the sound of waves in the distance. He looked over at me again, that same unreadable expression on his face. This is going to get messy, he said. I know. Once you cross that line, you can't go back. I nodded. I think we already did. He gave a low, almost pained laugh. Yeah, I guess we did. He reached out again, his fingers brushing mine, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what I should do or what it meant. I was just feeling it. The warmth of his hand, the weight of his gaze, the strange comfort of finally giving in to something that had been building for weeks. But even as his hand slipped into mine, one thought stayed lodged in the back of my mind, cold and certain. If my dad ever found out, it would destroy everything. When I woke up the next morning, I was back in my bed, and for a few seconds, I wasn't sure if any of it had actually happened. But then I saw my phone, and there it was. A single message from Mark, time-stamped 3:42 a.m. I didn't want to let you go. That was all it said. No follow-up, no emojis. Just a sentence that hit me in the chest like a sledgehammer. My mind raced. We hadn't done anything more than kiss again, not that night, but the way we kissed was different. Longer, slower, full of things neither of us had said out loud yet. I remembered the silence in the truck afterward, the soft glow of the street lamps on his face, and the way we sat there, not touching but not moving either. Like the world outside had stopped for a little while. Now it was morning, and everything was real again. I rolled out of bed and dragged myself to the shower, letting the hot water pound against my shoulders like it could somehow scrub last night off of me. But it didn't. If anything, it made me feel more awake, more present. When I got downstairs, my dad was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like he didn't have a single clue that I'd spent half the night tangled up in something completely unthinkable. You were out late, he said casually, not even looking up. Yeah, I replied, trying to keep my voice level. Just driving around. You go see anyone? My stomach clenched. I hesitated for a beat too long. He glanced over his shoulder, raising an eyebrow. Just a friend? I added quickly. He seemed satisfied with that and turned back to the pan. You're an adult, he said. Just don't forget who you are. I nodded, even though I had no idea what that meant anymore. Later that afternoon, while my dad was out running errands, I finally texted Mark back. "We can't keep doing this." His reply came faster than I expected. "Then tell me to stop." "I am telling you to stop." That's not the same as wanting me to stop. I stared at the screen for a long time, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Every instinct in me screamed that this was dangerous. Unfair. Completely out of bounds. But even with all of that, I couldn't bring myself to tell him he was wrong. Because he wasn't. Later that evening, I got another message. "I'm going to the cabin this weekend. You remember it, right?" Of course I remembered. The lake cabin, the place we used to go every summer when I was a kid. Fishing, swimming, campfires. Mark used to teach me how to skip rocks out on the dock, while my dad grilled burgers and laughed with a beer in hand. Back when things were simple. Before any of this. "You're going alone?" I asked. "Yeah. Just needed to get away. You should come." "Why would I do that?" "Because I won't touch you unless you want me to. But I think you want to." I didn't respond. I tossed my phone onto my bed and paced the room like I could somehow walk the confusion out of my system. But my head was spinning. He was right. I did want to go. Not because I thought it was a good idea. Not because I thought we could actually figure this out. But because being around him felt better than not. And because every time I told myself to cut this off, I found a reason not to. Saturday morning, I told my dad I was staying with some college friends at the beach for the weekend. He barely blinked. "Just be safe," he said, and handed me $50 for gas. 2 hours later, I was standing in front of the cabin, duffel bag in hand, heart hammering in my chest. Mark opened the door shirtless, holding a cup of coffee, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine shoot for hot dads who should definitely know better. His hair was still damp, and his voice was quiet when he said, "Didn't think you'd actually come." Neither did I. He stepped aside, and I walked in. The cabin looked exactly the same. Same old furniture, same wood-burning stove in the corner, same faded photos on the mantle of fishing trips and summer nights long gone. I saw one of me and him and my dad, standing side by side with ridiculous grins on our faces, all holding up fish that were definitely too small to brag about. Mark saw me looking. "Yeah," he said, setting his mug down. "That was the year you fell off the dock trying to cast." I smirked. "I didn't fall. You pushed me," he chuckled. "I helped you swim, didn't I?" The air between us thickened again, like it always did. We both stood there for a long moment before he finally said, "You hungry?" I was gonna throw something on the grill. We ate outside on the back deck, overlooking the lake. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. I watched the way the sunlight hit the water, tried to focus on the calm instead of the storm brewing inside me. Later, as the sky turned orange and the light began to fade, Mark leaned back in his chair and looked over at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you come?" I looked at him. At the lines around his eyes, the roughness in his voice, the quiet patience in the way he waited for me to answer. "I think I wanted to see if you meant it," I said. He didn't ask what it meant. He just nodded. "I do." He stood up, walked over to where I was sitting, and offered his hand. I hesitated, but only for a second, before I took it. He led me down the steps toward the dock, the air cooling with every step. We walked out to the end, where the wood creaked under our feet and the water lapped softly against the posts. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of light above the trees. He stopped, turned to face me, and brushed his fingers against mine. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I don't know where it goes, but I know I haven't felt like this in years." I searched his face, waiting for the part where he laughed it off, turned it into a joke. But he didn't. He meant it. And before I could talk myself out of it, I leaned forward and kissed him again. This time, it wasn't hesitant. There was no testing. No what ifs. It was slow, yes, but full of something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or surrender. And this time, when he pulled me closer, I didn't stop him. I woke up to the sound of birds. For a second, I didn't know where I was. The air smelled like pine and lake water, and the light filtering through the window was soft and golden. The kind of quiet morning that's supposed to feel peaceful. But my chest was tight. I turned over and saw him. Mark, still asleep beside me, half covered by the sheet, one arm stretched behind his head. He looked calm, like none of this was complicated. Like what we'd done the night before hadn't rewritten the rules of my entire life. I didn't feel calm. I slipped out of bed carefully, pulling on the jeans I'd kicked off sometime around midnight, and padded out of the room. The floorboards creaked under my feet, familiar and loud in the quiet cabin. I found my phone on the kitchen counter where I'd left it and saw 2 missed calls. From my dad. My stomach flipped. No messages. Just 2 calls. One at 11:47 p.m., one just before 1 in the morning. He hadn't called again since, but it didn't matter. My heart was already pounding. I tried to convince myself it could have been anything. Maybe he needed help moving something. Maybe he just wanted to check in. But I knew better. Somewhere deep down, I knew. I stepped out onto the porch and sat down hard on the steps, the cool wood pressing against the back of my legs. The lake was still, like glass. A canoe sat tied to the dock, rocking gently. The world looked peaceful, but inside me, everything was chaos. I was trying to breathe when I heard the door open behind me. "You always this quiet in the morning." Mark's voice was low, still raspy from sleep. I didn't turn around. "You're not wearing a shirt," I said, just to say something. He laughed softly. "You've seen me with a lot less than this." That should have made me smile. It didn't. He sat beside me, a mug of coffee in one hand. "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "My dad called." Mark went still. "When?" "Last night, twice." He set the mug down beside him. "You think he knows?" "I don't know what he knows, but he called. That's not nothing." Mark looked out over the water, his jaw clenched. "You gonna call him back?" I nodded. "Yeah. I need to figure out what I'm gonna say." He was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Do you regret coming here?" I turned to him, finally, and studied his face. He looked older in the morning light. Not tired, just worn. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. "No," I said honestly. "I don't regret coming." Mark exhaled slowly, nodding like that meant more than he'd let on. "But I don't know what to do now," I added. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't give me a speech or try to tell me it would all work out. He just sat with me in the silence, our shoulders almost touching, the lake stretching out in front of us like it had all the answers we didn't. "I can't lie to him," I said eventually. "I've never lied to him about something this big." "I'm not asking you to," Mark said, and his voice was gentler than I'd ever heard it. "I've never wanted to be something you have to hide." I nodded slowly. Then I said the part one hadn't admitted out loud until now. "I don't know how to be around him after this." Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Jamie, if this thing between us is going to happen, really happen, it has to be your choice. Not guilt. Not pressure. Not anything else." I looked down at my hands. "It was my choice." "I know," he said, "but it still comes with consequences." We sat there like that for a long time, both of us watching the lake, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. I wanted to freeze time right there, to stay in the quiet, in the calm, before everything started falling apart. Eventually, I stood. "I should go," I said. Mark didn't try to stop me. He just nodded once. "Let me know when you make the call." I left the cabin just before noon. The drive home felt longer than it ever had before. When I got back to the house, my dad's truck was in the driveway. I sat in the car for a long time before getting out. My palms were sweaty, my heart hammering. I had no plan, no script, just this sick feeling that whatever happened next was going to change everything. When I opened the front door, my dad was at the kitchen table. His phone was in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He looked up as soon as I walked in. "Where were you?" he asked, not angry, just still. I didn't answer right away. "Jamie," he said again, "where were you?" I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. I was with Mark. His expression didn't change. And then he asked the one question I wasn't ready to hear. Are you sleeping with him? The air left my lungs. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The question just hung there between us, sharp and impossible to ignore. Are you sleeping with him? My dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. Just quiet. Focused. Like he already knew the answer and was trying to decide what it meant. I felt 22 and 5 years old at the same time. I started, but the words stuck. My mouth was dry, my hands clenched at my sides, and I knew the longer I hesitated, the louder the answer became. So I nodded. His shoulders rose and fell once, like he'd been holding in a breath he didn't even realize. He set his phone down slowly on the table. How long? He asked. I sat down across from him, not trusting myself to stand. I don't know, not long. A few weeks, maybe. His jaw clenched. So this started after you got home from school. I nodded again. And he's been texting you at night, he added. I've seen it. You get up, you check your phone, you go quiet. I looked at him, startled. You noticed? I'm your father, Jamie. Of course I noticed. He sat back in the chair, rubbing his face with one hand. The silence between us was worse than if he'd yelled. Worse than if he'd slammed a fist on the table or stormed out. I trusted him, he said finally, more to himself than to me. I trusted both of you. My throat burned. Dad, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't go looking for it. But you let it happen, he shot back, looking at me now, his voice sharper. You let my best friend get into your head. You think that's okay? No, I said quickly. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me, he said. Help me understand how a guy who's known you since you were a kid ends up in your bed. I flinched. He didn't. It wasn't like that. I'm not a kid anymore. Right, he said bitterly. You're an adult now. You can make your own choices. So tell me, was it a choice? You wanted this? I looked at him and didn't answer, because saying yes felt like betrayal, and saying no would be a lie. He shook his head, like the whole thing was too heavy to hold. I should have seen it. He's been off for weeks. He asked about you too much. He joked about you too much. Dad, it wasn't a joke. Exactly, he snapped. It wasn't a joke. He stood and started pacing, running both hands through his hair. Jesus! Do you know what this does to our family? To me? He was supposed to be my brother. And now I can't even look at you without seeing... He cut himself off, breathing hard. I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. I didn't plan this, I said quietly. I didn't expect it. But once it started, I couldn't stop thinking about him. That made him stop. You like him? He asked, stunned. Like it's a thing now. I nodded, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what it is. But it's not just that. He stared at me for a long time, eyes searching my face for something he could hold on to. Some version of me he could still trust. Finally, he sat back down. He looked tired. Old. In a way I'd never seen before. I don't know how to deal with this, he said, and his voice cracked at the edges. I feel like I've lost two people at once. I felt that crack in my chest, too. You haven't lost me. He shook his head. Not yet. But I don't know if I can ever look at either of you the same way again. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. I don't even remember when I started crying, just that the tears were there, hot and quiet and unstoppable. And when I looked up, my dad wasn't yelling. He wasn't walking out. He was just looking at me. Softly. Like maybe he was trying to understand. I don't hate you, he said. I want to. But I don't. You're still my son. I nodded, wiping my face. I'm sorry. Don't say that unless you mean it. I do. He stood again, walked over, and for a second I thought he might hug me. Instead, he rested his hand on my shoulder for a brief second, then let it fall. I need time, he said. Okay. I don't want to see him. I understand. He picked up his keys, paused at the door, then looked back at me. I need you to figure out if this is real, he said. Not just a phase, not just about attention, because if it's not real, and you let all this happen anyway. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. And then he was gone. I didn't go to Mark right away. I thought I would. I even got in the car, keys in the ignition, phone in my hand. But the weight of that last conversation with my dad still sat on my chest like a stone, and I couldn't move past it. Not yet. Instead, I drove around for a while. Nowhere in particular, just the kind of driving you do when your head's a mess and you need the motion to keep from falling apart. The world outside the window blurred into late afternoon light and the low hum of traffic. I didn't even have music on. I kept hearing his voice in my head. Figure out if this is real. That was the thing, wasn't it? This whole time it had felt real, raw and complicated and electric. But love? I didn't know. I'd never been in it before. Not like this. Not with someone who came with this much risk. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want it to end without trying to understand it. So, 2 hours later, I pulled into Mark's driveway. He opened the door almost as soon as I stepped onto the porch, like he'd been waiting. His face shifted when he saw me. Relief, caution, something close to fear. I heard from him. He said before I could say a word. I nodded. Mark stepped aside. You want to come in? I walked in slowly, every part of me tense. The house smelled like coffee and sawdust. Same as always, but everything else felt different. He's hurt, I said. I figured. I told him the truth. Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed. How bad was it? He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. But I've never seen him look at me like that before. Mark lowered his gaze. I never wanted to put you in that position. You didn't, I said, and I meant it. I made my own choices. He looked up at me again, and for once he didn't try to smooth things over or play it cool. He looked tired, worn down. Honest. I'm not going to pretend this isn't messed up, he said. I've asked myself 100 times what the hell I'm doing. I thought I could ignore it, that it would pass. But it didn't. I stepped closer. So what now? He shook his head. I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to be with you. I don't know if your dad will ever speak to me again. But I do know I meant it when I said I haven't felt this way in a long time. I stood in front of him now, close. My voice was low. What is this? Mark looked at me for a long time before answering. I think it's the start of something. We stood there in the stillness of his kitchen, not touching, not rushing, just there, present. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a kid. I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. I just felt honest. I don't need everything figured out, I said. But if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. No more secrets. No more hiding, Mark nodded. Then we do it slow. We take it one step at a time. You decide what you're ready for. I'll follow your lead. He reached out, not to pull me in, not to kiss me, but to take my hand. Simple, grounded. I let him. And in that moment, it felt like maybe we could do it. Find a way to hold on to this without losing everything else. Maybe my dad would never understand. Maybe things would never go back to how they were. But life wasn't supposed to stay the same forever. People changed. Relationships evolved. And sometimes the people you're not supposed to fall for are the ones who see you most clearly.